Frankfurt, 1776. A time of revolutions, of secret societies, of kings afraid of the whispers in the streets. In the shadowed alleys of the Judengasse, the Jewish ghetto, lived a coin dealer named Mayor Rothschild. But Mayor wasn't like the others. He didn't just see silver. He saw patterns, networks, openings, hidden structures within society's machinery. He spoke little, but when he did, even the nobility leaned in. He began by selling rare coins to princes. That was the public tale. But one version whispered through family lines claimed that Mayor once disappeared for 7 nights, returning pale, changed, and carrying an unmarked book bound in red hide. A book he never let anyone read. As Mayer's fortune grew, so did the structure of his home. Rooms were built behind rooms, doors that only opened under candlelight, a staircase that turned clockwise by day, counterclockwise by night. Some staff said he spoke to mirrors. One maid claimed she entered his study to deliver tea and found him standing still before the looking glass, murmuring names. Names she did not recognize. Names that made her cry for reasons she couldn't explain. He sent his 5 sons across Europe, to London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, and Frankfurt. But before they left, he gathered them in a windowless chamber beneath the Judengasse synagogue, a space said to have existed long before the synagogue itself. There, in a ritual historians cannot confirm, he gave each son a sealed letter. One would burn his, one would bury his, one would frame it behind a black veil. One refused to say what was inside, but all returned changed. From that day forward, the Rothschild name began to echo across continents, not just as financiers, but as forces. Naples saw storms with no clouds. London nights fell thick and sudden. Vienna's clocks chimed out of sync. A carriage driver in Paris swore he picked up the same gentleman twice. Once at dawn, once at dusk, and both wearing the same ring. But the second man had no shadow. It became known in elite circles that to attend a Rothschild gathering meant more than mingling. One diplomat's diary from 1803 describes a dinner where no one ate. Guests sat in silence while a masked violinist played a piece said to last 13 hours. The diplomat wrote, "There was no food, there was no wine, and yet I left full, and terribly afraid. As their estates rose like monuments across Europe, so too did their mystery. Vaults said to be deeper than castles, windows with no rooms behind them, maps that changed shape when held in candlelight. The Rothschilds were not merely collecting gold. They were collecting silence, obedience, influence that moved kings like pawns and reshaped borders with the stroke of a pen. But always beneath it all was the hum, the steady low, endless hum, not of industry, not of power, but of something ancient and waiting." 1972 Château de Ferrières. France, a towering estate surrounded by manicured gardens and dense woodland. A place too grand to feel alive, and too silent to feel safe. The invitations arrived without return addresses. Black paper, ink that shimmered blood red under candlelight. Written backwards, it simply read, "You are summoned. Midnight, wear your mask." Marie-Helene de Rothschild was the host. Socialite, collector of art, keeper of oddities. Guests came from all corners of the world. Salvador Dali arrived with a baby-faced mask and blood-red robes. Audrey Hepburn wore a cage around her head, threaded with roses and thorns. Others, unnamed, unknown, arrived in masks too elaborate, too lifelike. Beasts, angels, anatomically correct faces but exaggerated, expressionless. Upon entry, all mirrors were covered. Phones were surrendered. The grand chandelier flickered as though disturbed by something unseen. Photographs leaked years later, but only fragments. Tables set not with food, but dismembered mannequins posed mid-scream. Chandeliers adorned with bird cages, some holding clocks ticking backward. Dolls with bleeding glass, eyes arranged like centerpieces. A woman, her identity never confirmed, said she tried to leave through the library. But each door led to a different hall. Each window looked out to the same moon, always at the same angle. She wandered for 3 days. When she finally emerged from the forest behind the estate, her dress was torn. Her mask was gone. Her mouth had been sewn shut, crudely with wire. She never spoke again, not even after the stitches were removed. Rumors say the ball was not merely a party. It was an offering. Guests recall the dining room being sealed. Only laughter, indistinct, filtered through the keyhole. Some claimed they heard Latin, others a soft lullaby. A staff member, decades later, revealed the oddest thing. None of the chandeliers cast shadows that night. The night ended at dawn. Or so they thought. One guest never left. His mask was found on the garden steps. Beneath it, a face frozen mid-scream. Eyes missing. The official story? A heart attack. But the heart was never found. What happened in that mansion is still debated. Some say it was just surrealist art. Others say it was a summoning, a contract renewed. Vienna, 1986. The Rothschild estate on the outskirts of the city had stood quiet for nearly 40 years. When a new owner sought to renovate part of the eastern wing, a team of contractors arrived to restore its forgotten chambers. They expected cobwebs, maybe rats. What they found instead was a room that did not belong. It was behind a false wall, discovered only because a mason's hammer rang hollow against what should have been solid stone. They peeled the plaster back to reveal an arched doorway. Inside, no windows, no furniture, just dust and a single chair. The chair faced a large, darkened portrait, a man in regal attire. But something was wrong. His face was familiar, yet disfigured. Where the eyes should have been, the canvas was violently torn. They later identified the painting as a forgotten rendering of Mayor Rothschild. Yet no records mention it. No archive claims its existence. One worker took a photograph. When he returned to show it the next day, the room was gone. Not closed, not sealed, gone. Where the wall had been broken through, there now stood a solid fireplace, unblemished, as though untouched for centuries. They called in the site manager. He ordered the team to remain silent. Within hours, 2 men resigned. One left Vienna entirely. The man who took the photograph? He vanished 3 days later. His camera was recovered from the Danube, waterlogged, but the memory card had melted. Not damaged, melted. Locals began calling it Das Verschwinden Zimmer, the disappearing room. Some say it's still there, but only at certain times. When the moon is high, when the wind stops, and when no one is watching. The name Rothschild means red shield. To the public, it's a reference to a sign hung outside a Frankfurt shop in the 1700s. But to those who study occult history, it's something far more sinister. In medieval Europe, a red shield was a symbol tied to ancient rites. Blood rituals said to offer protection, not from spirits, but from consequences. Legends tell of wandering merchants who painted their family crests in blood to seal unholy contracts. The contracts were not signed with ink. They were spoken at the edge of candlelight, witnessed only by shadows. The Rothschild coat of arms contains 5 arrows, 1 for each son. It bears a lion for dominion, and a red background said to represent courage. But some scholars argue the red is not symbolic, it's literal. A tribute to the pact that enabled the family's rise, a shield soaked in ancestral offering. A Bavarian legend, older than most records, speaks of a man who met a red-eyed stranger beneath a blood moon in 1601. The man returned wealthy. His house grew. His name spread. But his descendants never slept again. They aged rapidly. One was buried alive, still twitching. The Rothschild Frankfurt estate lies only miles from where the legend began. Coincidence or lineage? A sealed letter held in the British Museum and signed, undated, describes an encounter with a red patron during the Napoleonic Wars. It claims the Rothschilds were granted financial foresight, but in return, one soul from each generation would be taken during the hour between 3 and 4 a.m. Historians dismiss it as fiction, but the Rothschild family crypt in Frankfurt is heavily guarded. More than a dozen members buried there, and yet the official registry lists only 11. One grave is unmarked, always damp, always colder than the rest. They say animals refuse to pass its stone. They say the engraving on it changes, but only at night. In 1894, A maid at the Paris Rothschild mansion wrote a letter to her sister. It was found at her shoe after her death, smudged with wine stains and written in hurried, broken French. She spoke of voices in the wine cellar, voices that came only after midnight, voices that spoke in languages she couldn't place. Not German, not Latin, something deeper. Vetschauending. Hello, she wrote. They're not drinking wine. They're drinking light. She claimed she watched through a grate in the cellar wall and saw not bottles, but candles. Dozens of them, placed in a perfect spiral on the ground. The spiral spun outward from a ring of symbols, etched into the stone with what looked like rust or blood. She said there were figures, robed and silent, pouring wine into decanters that never filled. She said the wine smoked in the air, thick and glowing faintly, like it wasn't meant to exist in daylight. She mentioned a man with no hands conducting a ritual. He never spoke. He only stared at the spiral. The next night, she tried to speak to another maid. The girl screamed, and later insisted she saw a shadow crawl out of the first girl's mouth. 3 days later, the maid's body was found at the bottom of the cellar stairs. Her neck broken, her mouth stuffed with dirt and crushed grape skins, her eyes wide open. The family said it was a fall. The police accepted it without question. No formal investigation, no autopsy, but whispers remained. A groundskeeper said he heard humming from the cellar every full moon. He left the estate a week later. In 1923, a wine importer visiting the house remarked that some of the barrels bore no seal, no label, only carvings of unfamiliar glyphs. He asked for a taste. He was never seen again. Years later, the cellar was sealed, but the staff claimed they could still smell the wine, old, dry, sweet, and tinged with iron. No one drinks from that vintage. Not anymore. Across multiple generations, multiple estates, multiple countries, there is one recurring figure. Tall, gaunt, dressed in a crimson tailcoat. He appears when no one is looking, but everyone remembers seeing him. By staircases, in the reflection of glass windows, in security footage that shouldn't have recorded anything. The man in red, always watching, never moving, and never, ever showing his face. In 2011, a guest at a private Rothschild event took a group photo. Everyone was smiling, except one figure at the edge. Red coat, no face. When she tried to print the photo, her printer caught fire. She suffered third-degree burns. Her final words before slipping into a coma were, "He was looking at me, not the camera. Me." Another sighting occurred at the Chateau de Pregny in Geneva. A child, the daughter of a guest, wandered into the upper floors unattended. She returned pale and mute, clutching a cufflink shaped like a lion's head. Gold, with a red gem eye. It did not belong to any of the guests. CCTV footage showed only static during the time she was gone. But one frame, a single corrupted image, shows the outline of a tall man in red standing behind her. Faceless. In Paris, a butler reported waking at exactly 3:13 a.m. for 3 nights in a row to find muddy footprints outside his room. Footprints leading in, but never out. He resigned and left the country. In a letter sent to his brother, he wrote, "He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. I know what he wants, and I cannot give it." There's a painting that hangs in the Paris Estates gallery, and signed, "And always slightly askew." It shows a ballroom filled with masked dancers, and at the far end, by a mirror that reflects nothing, stands the man in red. The mirror is cracked. The reflection is empty. Some believe he is not a ghost, but something older, something bound to the family, a witness, a collector, and when you see him, truly see him, it means your name has been added to a list that is never written and never erased. They speak of room 13, a room that shifts position with the seasons, unmarked on any blueprint, always locked, always humming. A maid opened it once. She saw herself, older, lifeless, rotting. She quit that night. The next woman to clean the east wing disappeared. Her mop was found standing upright, still dripping. The crimson table appears only in a guest's fragmented journal from 1931. A dining hall with no food, plates filled with something living, breathing, red. He wrote, "It wasn't food, It was watching us. He died days later in his sleep, eyes open, hands clasped as if in prayer. And then, the procession. Every 13 years. Moonless night. Black cars arrive without sound. Hooded guests disembark. They carry nothing. And yet, the weight in the air triples. Torches are lit. Violins are played backward. Farmers report livestock dying by morning. Children wake up covered in dirt and leaves, miles from their beds. One boy, after sneaking close, drew red shields on every wall in his home for a month. He never spoke again. The family never acknowledged the event. But the lawn remains scorched where the torches stood. What we choose to ignore. They say the Rothschilds built empires. They say they shaped nations. But what if they inherited something older? Something that feeds not on land or wealth, but on silence. Every locked door, every missing record, every crooked portrait, a story waiting to be remembered. A ritual never stopped, only paused. We tell ourselves stories to explain the dark. But some shadows don't come from the lack of light. They come from the weight of what's always been there. You've opened the door. And now, you're part of the story. Pray it forgets you.